When Clint Eastwood stepped onto a busy suburban street in his dark brown blazer and navy dress pants, no one realized a Hollywood legend had just entered the scene. That's when a power-hungry police officer made the biggest mistake of his career, wrongfully detaining a teenage girl simply for walking through her own neighborhood. What he didn't know was that Clint had witnessed everything, and in true Eastwood style, he wasn't about to stand by and let injustice play out. With just a few words and his unmistakable presence, Clint didn't just stop the officer. He turned the entire moment into a lesson in power, prejudice, and what it really means to stand up for what's right. It was a late afternoon when the sun stretched golden fingers across the cracked sidewalk as Maya Carter walked home from her shift at Joe's Diner. She tugged at the strap of her backpack, still sticky from a spilled soda, and exhaled a tired sigh. Her feet ached from hours of standing, but the rhythmic click of her worn-out sneakers against the pavement kept her mind busy. Maya had dreams, big ones. While most of her classmates were talking about prom, she spent her nights re-watching classic films with her grandfather, memorizing the way the camera moved, how the dialogue hit just right. She wanted to be a filmmaker, to tell stories that mattered. But for now, the only stories she could afford to tell were the ones she scribbled in the margins of her school notebooks between shifts. She adjusted her hoodie and turned down a quiet suburban street, the kind lined with manicured lawns and driveways filled with SUVs. It wasn't the fastest way home, but it was peaceful, a place to collect her thoughts. Then she heard it, the slow roll of a police cruiser creeping up beside her. Maya kept walking, but the car kept pace. Her pulse quickened. She didn't need to look to know who was inside. "Hey, you!" The voice was sharp, authoritative. She stopped and turned, just as Officer Brent Holloway stepped out, his hand resting on his belt, like a warning. Maya swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "Yes, sir?" The officer's cold blue eyes swept over her, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Maya furrowed her brows. "Walking home." Holloway crossed his arms, his stance widening. "Where's home?" "Just a few blocks up," she answered, pointing toward her neighborhood. He didn't look. He didn't care. "That so?" His voice was laced with doubt. "Because I don't recognize you from around here." Maya's jaw tightened. She'd been through this before. "I live here," she said evenly, standing her ground. But Holloway wasn't listening. He took a step closer, his hand now hovering near his radio. And Maya suddenly realized this was about to go very, very wrong. The tension in the air thickened, pressing against Maya's skin like a heavy weight. Holloway tilted his head, his smirk sharp and calculated. "Got any ID?" Maya reached for her backpack, moving slowly to avoid giving him a reason to escalate. "Yeah, I have my—" "Don't move!" His voice lashed out like a whip. Maya froze. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her hands where he could see them. "I'm just grabbing my ID," she said, keeping her voice steady. Holloway stepped forward, his chest nearly brushing hers. He was twice her size, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Funny thing," he muttered. "People like you always have a story." Maya's stomach twisted. "People like me?" His eyes darkened. "Smart mouth, huh?" Before she could respond, he grabbed her arm and spun her around, shoving her against the black iron fence beside them. The cold metal dug into her ribs as she let out a sharp gasp. "What are you doing? I didn't do anything." Maya's voice cracked, panic rising in her throat. "Stop resisting," Holloway growled, twisting her arm behind her back. The sharp burn of pain shot up her shoulder. A voice from across the street shouted in protest, followed by the telltale sound of a phone recording. Maya struggled to turn her head, seeing a few neighbors standing frozen on their porches, some with concern, some with hesitation. No one was stepping in. Holloway yanked at her wrist harder. "I said stop resisting!" Tears stung Maya's eyes. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't doing anything at all. Her breath came in short, shaky bursts as she caught the flicker of movement from Holloway's belt. He was reaching for something, and then she saw it, the taser. Fear crashed over her like a tidal wave. "No, no, please!" The click of the taser activating sent her body into full panic, her chest heaving, her legs weak beneath her. And just as Holloway pulled it free from its holster, a voice cut through the chaos like a blade, deep, commanding, unmistakable. "That's enough." Everything stopped. Maya blinked through her tears, barely able to turn her head, but when she did, her breath caught. Standing just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes burning with quiet fury, was Clint Eastwood. The world seemed to freeze. Maya's breath hitched, her body locked in place against the cold iron fence. The taser buzzed to life, crackling in Officer Holloway's grip. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out everything, until another voice cut through the tension like a gunshot in a silent room. "That's enough." The words were calm, but they carried the weight of 1,000 Western standoffs. Every head turned. The bystanders watching from their porches gasped in recognition, murmuring among themselves. But Holloway, too focused on his own authority, barely spared a glance. Clint Eastwood took a step forward. His face was unreadable, set in the same expression he had worn in every classic film Maya's grandfather had ever made her watch. That look, the one that said he had already decided how this was going to end. Maya barely recognized him at first. The lines on his face were deeper than they were in the old movies, his silver hair barely visible beneath the brim of his hat. But the eyes were the same, sharp, piercing, unwavering. Holloway turned, his jaw tightening. "Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you." Clint didn't move. He didn't blink. His gaze locked onto the officer like a loaded gun. "It concerns all of us," he said. Maya couldn't breathe. Was this actually happening? The officer scoffed, his grip still tight around her arm. "I'm handling a situation here," he snapped. "Step away before I have to." "You're making a mistake." Clint's voice was low, steady, deliberate. Holloway straightened, annoyance flickering in his eyes. He still didn't seem to realize who he was talking to. "Look, sir!" Clint cut him off. "I said, that's enough." For a split second, Holloway hesitated. Clint's presence was an unshakable force, something even his badge and uniform couldn't overpower. Maya felt the air shift. The control Holloway thought he had over the moment. It was slipping. And Clint Eastwood wasn't done yet. The street was dead silent. The tension thickened like an old Western showdown, the kind Maya had watched late at night, curled up next to her grandfather. Except this wasn't a movie, and Clint Eastwood wasn't playing a role. He took another step forward, his shoulders squared, his gaze never leaving Holloway. "Let her go." His voice was calm, unwavering, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of commanding a room with nothing more than presence. The crowd watching from the sidewalk stirred. Whispers turned into words. "I saw everything," a woman's voice called out. "She didn't do anything wrong." "She lives around here," another neighbor added. "He's harassing her." The shift was undeniable. One voice became two, two became five. The bystanders, once hesitant, began speaking up. And Holloway noticed. For the first time since this all started, doubt flickered in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore. Clint stepped even closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over the situation. His voice dropped, low and steady. "Are you sure you want to be on the wrong side of history today?" Holloway stiffened. The weight of the words hung in the air. For a moment, Maya swore she saw the officer's fingers twitch against his belt, torn between stubborn pride and self-preservation. Then, finally, he let go. Maya stumbled forward, clutching her wrist, her pulse still thundering in her ears. The taser was switched off, tucked back into its holster. But Holloway wasn't done. He leaned in just enough for Maya to hear, his voice dripping with quiet venom. "She doesn't belong in this neighborhood," he muttered under his breath. Maya's stomach twisted. She wasn't even surprised. But before she could react, Clint Eastwood did. His head tilted slightly, his sharp eyes scanning Holloway as if he was sizing up a man who had just made the worst mistake of his life. And then, in a tone just as dangerous as the silence before a storm, Clint said, "Neither do you." Maya staggered back, her breath still ragged as her wrist throbbed with pain. The world felt surreal, like she had just stepped out of her own life and into a movie. Officer Holloway had walked away, his face twisted in barely contained rage. But it didn't matter. She was free. Her hands trembled as she rubbed the soreness from her arm, trying to ground herself. Everything had happened so fast. 1 second, she was pinned to a fence, powerless. The next, she was standing beside Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood! She turned slowly, her mind struggling to process it. The man who had just stood between her and a taser. The man who had made a racist cop back down with nothing but words. And then it hit her. The sharp blue eyes, the steady voice, the unmistakable presence. Her breath caught. I know who you are." Clint gave a small nod, his expression softer now. He wasn't playing a role. He wasn't performing for cameras. He was just here, being exactly who he was. She swallowed hard, still shaking. "You're Clint Eastwood." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it faded just as quickly. He didn't gloat, didn't make a big deal of it. Instead, he looked at her the same way he had looked at that officer, direct, unwavering, like he saw everything. "And I know who you are," Clint said, his voice quiet but firm. Maya blinked. No one had ever said that to her before. "You're someone who deserves better than this." The words landed in her chest like a stone thrown into deep water. She felt her throat tighten, but she refused to cry. Not here, not now. Instead, she just nodded, exhaling shakily. "Thank you," she whispered. Clint gave her a final look as if making sure she was okay before tucking his hands into his pockets. "Come on, kid," he said. "Let's get you out of here." By the time Maya got home, her phone was already blowing up. The video was everywhere. Some shaky, grainy footage, taken from across the street, had captured everything. The moment Officer Holloway grabbed her, the taser, and then Clint Eastwood stepping in like he was walking onto a movie set. The clip spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. Twitter exploded with reactions. Clint vs. Cop started trending, alongside demands for Holloway's immediate firing. Maya scrolled through comment after comment. Clint Eastwood shutting down a racist cop like he's still in a Western? Legend! This isn't a movie. This is real life. And this girl deserves justice. Imagine getting put in your place by Clint freaking Eastwood. That officer's career is done. Her stomach twisted. It was overwhelming. The media requests started coming in almost immediately. CNN, NBC, Good Morning America. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone wanted her story. But Maya didn't want to be a headline. She didn't want this moment to define her. She ignored the calls, silenced her notifications, and pulled her hoodie over her head. She just wanted to breathe. Then her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a number she didn't recognize. It was Clint Eastwood. The message was short. "Meet me for coffee tomorrow. I have a feeling you have more to say than the news will let you." Maya stared at the screen. Of all the things that had happened in the last 24 hours, this felt the most unreal. The next day, the small cafe smelled like freshly brewed espresso and warm pastries. The place was quiet, tucked away from the chaos of the world outside. Maya sat across from Clint, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, still unsure how she had ended up here. He sipped his black coffee, watching her, not impatiently, not expecting anything, just waiting. Finally, Maya exhaled, staring down at her hands. "I don't want to just be the girl in the viral video," she admitted. "I have bigger dreams than that." Clint nodded like he had already known. "Then tell me, kid, what do you really want?" Maya swallowed hard, then lifted her gaze to meet his. "I want to be a filmmaker." For the first time in a long time, saying it out loud didn't feel like a fantasy, and the way Clint Eastwood was looking at her, he believed it too. The cafe hummed with quiet conversations, but Maya barely heard any of it. She had just said it, out loud, in front of Clint Eastwood. "I want to be a filmmaker." Clint leaned back in his chair, studying her. Not in a doubtful way, in a way that made her feel truly seen. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," he finally said, his voice low and reflective. Maya blinked. "Who?" He exhaled, swirling the coffee in his cup before setting it down. "Back when I was starting out, Hollywood wasn't too keen on letting in outsiders. They wanted a certain kind of actor, a certain kind of filmmaker." He smirked slightly. "And I wasn't it." Maya frowned. "Clint Eastwood? Rejected?" "But that's the thing about this business," he continued. "People will always try to tell you where you do and don't belong." His gaze sharpened. "The trick is proving them wrong." Maya felt something inside her shift. She knew that feeling. Every time a teacher looked surprised when she turned in an exceptional project. Every time a customer at the diner questioned if she really worked there. Every time someone assumed she wasn't capable of more. Clint must have seen it in her expression, because he nodded like he understood exactly what she was thinking. "Hard work doesn't go unnoticed," he said. "Talent will open doors, but persistence? That's what keeps you in the room." She let his words settle, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. For the first time in a long time, her dream didn't feel impossible. Clint reached into his jacket, pulling out a simple, crisp business card. "If you're serious about filmmaking," he said, sliding it across the table, "let's make it happen." Maya stared at it. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just some polite encouragement. This was real. She looked up at Clint, the weight of the moment sinking in. This could change everything. Clint just gave her that signature smirk, the kind that made people listen. "Only if you're ready for it, kid." And for the first time, Maya knew she was. Maya had barely slept since the meeting. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the business card on her nightstand, taunting her with possibility. 3 days later, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Her hands were still sticky from washing dishes at the diner. But when she saw the name on the screen, her breath caught. Clint Eastwood's assistant. "Hello?" she answered, wiping her hands on a towel. "Hi, Maya?" The voice was bright and professional. "Clint mentioned you might be interested in seeing a film set. How's Friday?" Maya almost dropped the phone. She barely managed to say yes. The moment she stepped onto the lot, her entire world changed. The film set was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. Lights, cameras, towering equipment, and crews buzzing with focused intensity. Her chest tightened with equal parts excitement and terror. This was where movies came to life, where she wanted to be. And Clint had brought her here. "Maya," his voice called. She turned to see him standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching her reaction. "You look like you just stepped into a dream." She nodded quickly, unable to hide her awe. "I think I did." Clint chuckled, then gestured for her to follow. "Come on, let's introduce you to some people." Maya soaked up everything. She asked questions, took mental notes, watched every little detail, from how the director spoke to the crew to the way the cinematographer lined up a shot. For the first time, she wasn't on the outside looking in. She belonged here. As they walked past the massive soundstage, Clint turned to her. "One day I expect to see your name in the credits." Maya stopped. She stared up at him, his words hitting harder than anything she'd ever been told before. Because Clint Eastwood didn't say things unless he meant them. And for the first time, Maya believed it too. The weight of the past few weeks still clung to Maya, but she wasn't letting it hold her down. She had a story to tell. Sitting at her grandfather's old desk, Maya scribbled notes furiously, filling page after page of a worn-out notebook. Scenes unfolded in her mind like a movie, the kind she'd always dreamed of making. But this time, she wasn't just dreaming, she was doing. Her short film wasn't just about what had happened to her, it was about resilience, about standing up, about not letting the world define you. The title? Seen. With Clint's encouragement, she began filming on weekends, enlisting the help of classmates who believed in her vision. No expensive cameras, no Hollywood crew, just raw passion and a determination that burned brighter than ever. She took to social media, sharing behind-the-scenes clips, discussing the importance of diversity in film, and opening up about her journey. People listened. They supported her. They shared her posts. The response was overwhelming. Young filmmakers, activists, and even professionals reached out, offering advice, encouragement, and even a few resources to help her finish the film. Meanwhile, Officer Holloway's name had become a stain on the department. The video from that night had kept circulating, sparking nationwide outrage. Mounting pressure forced him to resign. Maya should have felt vindicated. But she barely gave it a passing thought. Her focus wasn't on the past anymore. It was on what came next. Clint checked in often, sometimes calling, sometimes texting, short but meaningful words of encouragement. Saw your last post? Keep going. You're on the right track. You're not just making a film, kid, you're making a statement. By the time she submitted Scene to a major student film competition, her hands were steady. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. Months later, Maya stood on stage, gripping the award in her trembling hands. Best Student Film. The words echoed in her mind, but they still didn't feel real. She blinked against the bright stage lights, scanning the audience until her eyes landed on him. Clint Eastwood sat near the back, arms crossed, his signature smirk just barely visible. She took a breath. This moment wasn't just hers. She stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent. "This award isn't just for me," she said, her voice strong, steady. "It's for every young filmmaker who's ever been told they don't belong, for everyone who's been made to feel invisible, for everyone who's been underestimated." A wave of applause rippled through the room, but Maya barely heard it. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, the sound of everything changing. As she walked off the stage, Clint was waiting. She hesitated for half a second, searching for words, but none came. She didn't need them. Clint nodded, that same approving look in his eyes. "Told you I'd see your name in the credits?" Maya grinned, because now she believed it too. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.